Central Europe, 22,000 years ago. The temperature has dropped to 37 degrees below zero. Not the kind of cold you feel on a winter morning walking to your car. The kind of cold that kills you in your sleep without a sound. The kind that turns the air itself into a weapon. The periglacial steppe stretches endlessly in every direction. No walls, no shelter, no horizon. Only darkness. Total, absolute darkness, interrupted by a single point of orange light. A bonfire. Small, fragile, almost embarrassingly small for what it is being asked to do tonight. Around it, 12 human beings sleep pressed together, sharing heat the way animals do, not from comfort, but from mathematics. 12 bodies, one fire, minus 37 degrees. The math is simple, the margin is not. And then a sound, not loud. That is what makes it dangerous. A soft compression of frozen snow beneath something heavy. Once, then again, then silence. Then the eyes, dozens of them. Yellow reflections appearing between the trees at the edge of the firelight. Low, steady, too evenly spaced to be stars. Too close, too still. Canis lupus spelaeus, the cave wolf. An entire pack, moving in absolute silence, surrounding the camp from 3 directions at once. At that moment, one of the 12 wakes up. What does he do? What does any human being do when they understand, with complete and quiet certainty, that if the fire goes out tonight, there is no tomorrow? The answer to that question did not just determine whether those 12 survived. It determined whether you exist. For decades, scientists believed they knew what happened next. They built entire textbooks around it. They were completely wrong. By the end of this, you will never look at 3 in the morning the same way again. What researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology discovered between 2014 and 2019, analyzing more than 800 Paleolithic settlements from the Gravettian period, did not just revise our understanding of prehistoric survival. It destroyed it entirely. These humans were not helpless victims huddled in the dark, hoping the wolves would choose easier prey. They had constructed defense systems so layered, so precise, so psychologically sophisticated that modern military strategists would recognize the architecture immediately. But first, you need to understand what they were actually facing. Because modern textbooks have made a serious mistake. They have softened the threat. The fossil record from the Predmosty site in the present-day Czech Republic, dated to approximately 26,000 years ago, shows something that stops researchers mid-sentence. Wolf tooth marks on human bones, not on the edges. Not opportunistic, gnawing on abandoned carcasses. These marks are centered on the long bone's femur, tibia, humerus pressed inward at exactly the position a predator takes when extracting marrow from a kill. Researchers Hanna Hložek and Jerzy Bruzek from Charles University in Prague documented at that single site at least 34 individual humans with direct skeletal evidence of wolf predation. 34 people, one site. The Canis lupus spelaeus of the glacial era was not the gray wolf you picture when you close your eyes. It was between 15 and 23% larger than its modern descendants. It weighed between 50 and 80 kilograms. It hunted in coordinated packs, and unlike modern wolves, it had not yet learned the one thing that saves human lives today. It had not learned to fear fire. Think about what that means. Every instinct modern wolves carry: the hesitation at the edge of a campfire, the retreat at the smell of smoke. None of that existed yet. These animals approached light the way they approached darkness, without fear, without pause. This was not a predator you outran. This was a predator that waited, which raises the question that archaeologists could not answer for most of the 20th century. If Canis lupus spelaeus was this lethal, the evidence, this clear, this consistent, this widespread, then why did Gravettian human population density increase in exactly the territories with the highest wolf concentration? Something was working. And what it was will change how you think about the people who built everything we are. The answer began to emerge in the winter of 1986. Not in a laboratory, not from a theory, from the frozen ground itself. The excavation site at Dolní Věstonice, in the Moravian region of what is now the Czech Republic, had been partially explored since the 1920s. Archaeologists knew it was significant. They did not know how significant until Bohuslav Klima's team broke through a layer of permafrost undisturbed for nearly 27,000 years. What they found beneath it stopped the excavation completely. Not because of what was there, because of where everything was. 16 human skeletons, 3 central hearths, and not a single body out of place. Klima spent weeks mapping the exact position of every individual before allowing a single bone to be moved. What emerged was not the scattered arrangement of people who had fallen asleep where exhaustion took them. It was a system. The most physically robust individuals identified by bone density, cortical thickness, and muscle attachment markings carved into their skeletons by years of heavy use occupied the outermost ring. Facing outward, bodies angled toward the perimeter. Inside that ring, younger individuals. Teenagers, based on skeletal maturity markers. Old enough to react, young enough to be protected. And at the center, pressed closest to the 3 hearths. Women showing skeletal indicators of pregnancy or recent lactation. The most physiologically vulnerable, placed in the most defensible position the camp could offer. Researchers from the Archaeological Institute of the Czech Academy of Sciences, revisiting Klima's data in 2003, gave this arrangement a name that has stayed in the literature ever since: the defensive mandala layout. But here is what the name does not capture. This was not instinct. Animals cluster for warmth. What Klima found at Dolny Viestanis was not clustering. It was assignment. Specific individuals in specific positions for specific functional reasons. Someone decided who slept where. Someone enforced it. Someone understood that the geometry of a sleeping group could be the difference between 16 people waking up and 16 people not waking up. They invented perimeter defense doctrine 20,000 years before the first organized army drew its first battle line. But spatial arrangement was only the first layer. Francesco D'Erico, prehistorian at the University of Bordeaux, spent years cross-referencing skeletal data from more than 40 Upper Paleolithic settlements across Europe. He was looking for a pattern that most colleagues considered too subtle to find in bone. He found it. In site after site, without exception, at least 2 individuals whose skeletons told a different story from the rest. Asymmetrically worn joints, chronic tension markers in the neck and upper back, microfractures consistent with sustained postural stress, not from heavy labor, but from hours spent holding a single alert position, night after night, week after week. These were not injuries. They were signatures. The signature of someone who did not sleep when the others slept, who sat upright in the darkness, facing outward, while 11 other human beings trusted them completely with the most defenseless hours of their existence. The night guards. And this is the detail that moves people when they truly sit with it, not the system, but the trust the system required. 12 people in the most dangerous environment human beings have ever inhabited, choosing to close their eyes and surrender consciousness because 2 companions had agreed to stay awake. That is not survival instinct. That is civilization. But guarding means nothing if your fire dies. And in a glacial winter steppe, winds reaching 70 kilometers per hour, temperatures capable of killing an unprotected human in under 40 minutes, the fire always threatened to die. André Leroy Gourhan began excavating the Pincevent site in northern France in 1964. What he uncovered became one of the most studied Magdalenian settlements in the world, not because of the tools, not because of the art, but because of the fires. 3 of them. Always 3. Distributed, not randomly, not symmetrically, but at the vertices of an irregular triangle, each position with a precision only visible when you overlay the hearth locations onto a topographic map of the surrounding terrain. Every triangle pointed the same direction, toward the forest line, toward the frozen riverbed, toward the natural corridors that any large predator approaching from darkness would instinctively follow. This was not coincidence. This was targeting. 3 overlapping cones of light and radiant heat angled outward, a barrier that an animal the size of a cave wolf could not cross without stepping fully into illuminated space. Exposed, visible, hesitant, tactical, geometric, engineering, but it had a fatal constraint. Margarita Tengberg, archaeobotanist at the National Museum of Natural History in Paris, conducted fuel analysis of Paleolithic hearths under reconstructed glacial winter conditions. Her findings were stark. Maintaining 3 fires through a single winter night required a minimum of 40 kilograms of dry fuel per hearth, 120 kilograms of wood per night. For a group moving seasonally across a frozen landscape, carrying everything they owned, that number is not a logistical challenge. At the edge of death sentence, and yet they survived. The solution was sitting in a Belgian cave that archaeologists had cataloged, archived, and quietly ignored for over 150 years. The Goyet Cave sits in the Belgian Ardennes, carved into limestone cliffs above a river that has been running since before our species existed. It was first excavated in the 1860s by Edouard Dupont, a Belgian naturalist who pulled thousands of bone fragments from its chambers and shipped them to Brussels, where they were cataloged, labeled, and placed in storage. And then, for 150 years, largely forgotten. In 2009, Mietje Germonpré, a paleontologist at the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences, returned to that collection with modern analytical tools and a question the 19th century had not thought to ask. She was not looking for wolves. She was not looking for dogs. She was looking for the line between them, and what she found pushed the entire field of canid domestication research back by more than 10,000 years. The canid skulls from Goyet, dated to approximately 36,000 years ago, were not wolves. The snout was shorter. The cranial vault was wider. The dental arcade showed modifications that cannot occur through natural selection alone. They require generations of deliberate pressure. Selective breeding, human choice applied to animal biology across hundreds of consecutive births. These were proto-dogs, not pets, not companions in the sentimental sense we use that word today. Something older and more functional. Animals that had been living alongside human groups long enough and selectively enough that their anatomy had begun to reflect human preferences rather than natural ones. And their presence in a human camp 36,000 years ago meant one thing. The fuel problem, 120 kilograms of wood per night that no migrating group could carry indefinitely, had a biological solution that required no fuel at all. A proto-dog sleeping at the edge of a glacial camp can detect the scent of an approaching wolf from more than 300 meters away under favorable wind conditions. It does not need light. It does not need fire. Its nervous system runs a continuous background scan that no human sentinel, however disciplined, can replicate. The alert response is immediate: the sudden rigidity of the body, the slow rise of hackles along the spine, the low subsonic growl that sits just below the threshold of conscious hearing, but lands directly in the oldest part of the human brain, like a stone dropped into still water. A trained human reads that signal in under 2 seconds. In survival terms, that warning window is an enormous amount of time, enough to feed 3 fires, to wake the outer ring, to transform a sleeping camp from a collection of vulnerable bodies into something that looks, from the tree line, considerably more dangerous than it did a moment ago. The Gravettian humans had not simply found a workaround to the fuel problem. They had outsourced the most critical function of their entire defense system to an animal that had co-evolved alongside them long enough to make that outsourcing instinctive on both sides. The wolf had become the solution to the wolf problem. But the cave wolves were not static. They observed. They adapted. They learned which approach angles triggered the proto-dog response and began testing others. They learned that wind direction mattered. That patience, applied long enough, revealed vulnerabilities no system could fully eliminate. And the humans knew it. Excavations of Pavlovian culture camps in the Moravian-Austrian corridor, documented by Martin Oliva of the Moravian Museum in Brno between 1995 and 2011, revealed something that does not belong in the image of hunter-gatherers living purely in the present moment. Mammoth bones, femurs, shoulder blades, cranial sections driven vertically into frozen ground at intervals of 60 to 80 centimeters, forming semicircular barriers around the camp perimeter, between 40 and 80 centimeters high. They would not stop an adult cave wolf. Everyone who built them understood that perfectly. But they would channel one, force it to approach from a specific angle, compress its options, direct it toward exactly the point where the outer ring was already watching. It was not a wall. It was a funnel. Paleolithic, crude, and so precisely conceived that modern crowd control architecture operates on an identical principle. These people were not reacting to danger. They were designing around it. And yet, no physical system, not the mandala, not the fire triangle, not the proto-dog, not the mammoth bone barriers, solves the problem that lives inside the human skull at 3 in the morning. The problem with no weight, no teeth, no tracks in the snow. The problem of simply knowing they are out there. In 1979, archaeologists excavating the Hohenstein Stadel cave in the Swabian Alb region of southwestern Germany, recovered something that initially seemed to belong to a different category of human activity entirely. A figurine carved from mammoth ivory, a human body with the head of a lion, dated to between 40,000 and 43,000 years ago. Among the oldest figurative sculptures ever recovered anywhere on Earth. Nicholas Konrad of the University of Tübingen spent years studying this object, and comparable pieces recovered from nearby Holyfels, and what his team's surface microwear analysis revealed reframed the question of what Paleolithic portable art was actually for. The figurines had been held continuously. The wear patterns on their surfaces, smooth to a degree requiring thousands of hours of repeated finger contact, were not consistent with display, ritual placement, or occasional handling. They were consistent with something people do when they cannot stop their hands from moving. When the mind is in a state it cannot exit through thought alone and needs the body to do something repetitive, something tactile, something that creates a small loop of physical sensation to interrupt the larger loop of fear. In clinical terms, a grounding object, a regulating stimulus, a tool for bringing the nervous system down from hyperarousal to a state where functional thought is possible again. The people of the glacial era called it nothing. They simply held it, and rubbed it, and held it again. Through the long hours between the last guard shift and the first gray light of a dawn that was not guaranteed to come. In the Chauvet Cave in the Ardèche region of southern France, dated to approximately 36,000 years ago, there is a gallery accessible only by passing through a narrow passage in complete darkness. On its ceiling, wolves, not fleeing, not attacking, simply present, rendered with the observational precision that comes from having watched something very carefully for a very long time. Jean Klotz, who led the scientific study of Chauvet for 2 decades, proposed that these images served a function simultaneously psychological and ritual. To paint the wolf was to possess it symbolically, to fix it onto a surface, to reduce it from a living force moving through darkness to a shape that human hands had made and human eyes could examine without flinching. They were domesticating the fear before they domesticated the animal. And this is where the story becomes something more than archaeology. Because what the figurines and the cave paintings reveal, taken together, across thousands of years and dozens of sites, is that these people understood something about the human mind that clinical psychology would not formally articulate until the 20th century. That fear unmanaged does not stay the same size. It grows. It colonizes the hours that should belong to sleep. It degrades the judgment of the guards, the steadiness of the hands feeding the fire, the coordination between people whose lives depend on each other making correct decisions under pressure. They understood without the language, without the framework, that emotional regulation was not a luxury. It was infrastructure, as essential to survival as the fire, as the mandala, as the proto-dog sleeping at the edge of the light. And even with all of it, the geometry, the fire, the biological alarm, the grounding objects, the painted walls some nights, the system was pushed to its absolute limit. Those are the nights that proved what it was actually made of. Not all cultures of the same period arrived at the same answers. And the contrast between those who did and those who did not tells us something precise about why one lineage of humans is still here and another is not. The Neanderthals lived alongside Homo sapiens in Europe until approximately 40,000 years ago. They were not inferior, not cognitively simple, not the brutish caricature that early 20th century science constructed around their bones. They were experienced, adaptable, and had survived glacial conditions that would have ended most species entirely. But their response to the predator problem was fundamentally different. Analyses of Neanderthal occupation sites at Cueva Morin in Cantabria and La Feracie in the Dordogne reveal a pattern consistent across every settlement studied. Camps invariably located inside caves, beneath deep rock overhangs, within natural formations, offering a single defensible entry point. The Neanderthals solved the perimeter problem by eliminating the perimeter. One entrance, one direction to watch. The topography itself as the wall. It is, on its surface, the more logical solution. And for a long time, it worked. Until it did not. Because a wolf at the entrance of a cave is not a perimeter defense problem. It is a containment problem. 17 people, one exit, something between them, and that exit weighing 70 kilograms and not afraid of fire. Homo sapiens, by contrast, camped in open ground with a frequency that initially baffled researchers. Why choose exposure when shelter is available? The answer was not romantic. It was tactical. Open ground gives you options. A cave gives you walls, and walls, in the wrong moment, are the thing that kills you. The sapiens of the glacial era chose the controllable danger of exposure over the uncontrollable danger of confinement. They chose the harder life because the harder life was the survivable one. In 2019, a research team from the University of York, led by archaeologist Penny Spikins, decided to stop theorizing and start testing. 21 nights. Northern Norway. Temperatures reaching minus 20 degrees Celsius. 12 volunteers, no modern equipment, no synthetic insulation, no emergency protocols beyond a satellite phone locked in a vehicle 400 meters away. Paleolithic tool replicas. 2-hour rotating guard shifts. 3 fires in the tripartite configuration documented at Pince event. And 6 Anatolian shepherd dogs selected for temperament calm enough to sleep, alert enough to wake at the right moment, standing in for the proto-dogs that Germonprez research placed in human camps 36,000 years earlier. The reintroduced wolf population in the region was small, 11 animals. On 16 of the 21 nights, they came. The dogs detected the approach on 15 of those 16 occasions. Average lead time, 4 minutes and 23 seconds. The tripartite fire configuration deterred the advance without human intervention in 12 of the 16 cases. On 3 occasions, the outer ring guards had to actively respond, moving toward the perimeter, vocalizing, creating enough coordinated human presence that the pack withdrew. One night, the system failed partially. 2 fires dropped simultaneously during a wind shift. The dogs detected the approach, but their alert was misread by a guard in the early stages of sleep deprivation. The wolves reached within 40 meters of the camp before a second guard caught the signal and responded correctly. 40 meters, in total darkness. With animals that had not yet fully recalibrated their instinctive distance from humans, the system worked. Not perfectly, but it worked, and for a reason Spikins had not fully anticipated. The volunteers who managed to sleep even shallowly, even in fragmented intervals between guard rotations, maintained the cognitive coherence necessary to read signals correctly, make decisions quickly, and coordinate without escalating into panic. The volunteers who could not sleep, who remained in continuous hypervigilance, body rigid, mind-running threat assessments on every sound the darkness produced, began making errors by the 3rd night. They fed the fires incorrectly. They misidentified wind noise as animal movement. They woke their relief guards too early, compressing the sleep window of the entire rotation. On 2 occasions, volunteers vocalized, shouted at moments when silence was the correct response. In a real Gravesian camp, with a real pack of Canis lupus speleus testing the perimeter, those errors would not have been recoverable. The greatest threat to nocturnal survival in the Paleolithic was not the predator outside the camp. It was the fear inside the human nervous system. The wolves could be managed, the geography could be designed around, the fuel could be supplemented. But a mind that had lost the ability to distinguish between a real threat and wind through frozen grass, that mind became the vulnerability no external system could compensate for. Panic was not a failure of courage. It was an ancient threat detection system running without the override mechanisms that sleep, trust, and community provide. The system worked because the people inside it trusted each other enough to close their eyes. And closing your eyes, in that context, was not weakness. It was the bravest thing a human being could do. This is the part of the story the bones cannot tell you directly, but it is written into everything else they left behind. What those 12 people carried out of that night and the 10,000 nights that followed was not just their lives. It was a body of knowledge so carefully accumulated, so precisely transmitted across generations, that its architecture is still visible in the systems we build today. The defensive mandala layout, the most vulnerable at the center, the most capable at the perimeter, is the geometric foundation of protected civilian zone doctrine in modern conflict. Not because anyone copied it, because it is the correct solution to the problem, and correct solutions get rediscovered. The tripartite fire system 3, overlapping cones of light angled toward probable approach vectors, is the conceptual predecessor of tactical lighting in military forward operating bases of triangulated coverage mathematics that security engineers still use when deciding where to place cameras in the dark. The proto-dog alarm network biological, requiring no power, no maintenance, no conscious operator attention, is the functional ancestor of every motion detection system, every perimeter sensor array that modern security infrastructure depends upon. The principle has not changed, only the substrate. The emotional regulation object's ivory figurines, worn smooth by thousands of hours of anxious fingers, are the material ancestors of every grounding technique in contemporary trauma therapy. Every tactile anchor used in EMDR treatment. Every object a therapist suggests a patient carry. The cave paintings wolves rendered on the ceilings of the deepest, darkest galleries are the oldest evidence we have of what modern psychology calls exposure therapy. Controlled, repeated confrontation with the source of fear in a context that allows the nervous system to habituate rather than escalate. They did not have the words for any of this. They had something better. They had the results. Every system you rely on tonight to feel safe, the locks on your doors, the lights in your street, the notification on your phone that tells you something has moved outside, has a blueprint that old. Not a metaphorical blueprint, a functional one, because the problems have not changed as much as we tell ourselves they have. The darkness is different. What moves in it is different. But the human being trying to stay alert enough to protect the people sleeping nearby, that has not changed at all. Survival was never instinct. It was always design. Tonight, somewhere in the world, it is 3 a.m, and someone is awake who did not choose to be. Not because of noise, not because of pain, because of something older than either a sudden, sourceless certainty that something is wrong, that something is moving, that the darkness on the other side of the wall is not as empty as it should be. You know this feeling. Every human being alive knows this feeling. For most of modern history, we have called it anxiety, insomnia, an overactive imagination, a stress response, a symptom of a world that moves too fast and rests too rarely. We have treated it as a malfunction. It is not a malfunction. It is the oldest working system in your body, running exactly as designed, checking the perimeter the way it has checked the perimeter every night for tens of thousands of years. Since the first proto-dog lifted its head at the edge of a glacial fire and the first human sentinel read that signal correctly and kept 12 people alive until morning. You are not broken at 3 a.m. You are on shift. The fire at Dolny Viestinis went out eventually. Every fire does. But before it did, it kept alive the people who taught their children the geometry of the mandala, the angle of the triangle, the sound of a proto-dog's subsonic growl in total darkness, the specific weight of an ivory figurine in a frightened hand. Who taught them how to close their eyes when every instinct screamed to keep them open? Because closing your eyes inside a system you trust is not surrender. It is the highest expression of what it means to be human, to build something together that is stronger than any one of you, to sleep not because you are safe, but because you have made each other safe enough. The 12 people who survived that night in Central Europe 22,000 years ago did not know they were making history. They were just trying to make it to morning, and they did, and so did their children. Down through hundreds of generations of glacial winters and burning summers and everything the planet threw at a species that had no biological right to survive as many of those things as it did, until one night, without ceremony, without anyone marking the occasion, the fire they had kept burning became the first city. The mandala became the first wall. The proto-dog became the companion sleeping at the foot of your bed tonight. And the restlessness you feel at 3 a.m. became the price of admission to a lineage that refused, across every imaginable circumstance, to go quietly into the dark. You are not afraid of the dark. You remember what lived in it. And the fact that you are here, existing in this particular moment, means that every single one of those 12 people made it through that night. Every one. The fire held.